Millicent rejected dozens of rich girls, then fell for a poor delivery girl. "You don't belong here." That's what they told her, right before the most powerful man in the room turned and said, "Then I guess I don't either." Layla hadn't meant to spill the red juice. She was just delivering noodles, the same order she'd made a dozen times for the same address, except this time, her app got it wrong. She stepped into a room where heels cost more than rent, where laughter came with diamond teeth, and silence fell the moment the splash hit the banker's white suit. Gasps. Laughter, then a hand on her arm, rough and cold. "Out now." But that's when he stood up. Not the man she expected. Not a savior in shining armor. Just a stranger with tired eyes who hadn't smiled once all night. Until now. "Let her go," he said. And for the first time in her life, someone powerful didn't walk past her. He walked toward her. And that's how it began. With noodles, a ruined party, and the first time she heard his name. Richard Stone. Billionaire, untouchable, and somehow, already watching her like she wasn't just a mistake, but something had been waiting for. She didn't even remember how she walked out of that ballroom. Her fingers were still sticky from the juice, her ears still rang from the laughter, and the man in the white suit, the one she'd soaked, had yelled something she couldn't unhear. She probably doesn't even know what a suit is. But what haunted her most wasn't his voice. It was Richard's. His words were calm, almost bored, but they cut through the room like thunder. Let her go. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold the guard. He just looked at her and asked the question no one ever had. "What's your name?" "Layla, 26. Born and raised in a tiny apartment above a kitchen that never slept. Her grandmother's restaurant, Meadow Spoon, was barely surviving. Half of their orders came through a glitchy delivery app. The other half came from neighbors who couldn't always pay, but always said thank you. She never planned to crash a millionaire's gala. Never imagined the richest man in the city would be watching her scramble to wipe juice off a banker's chest. Back home that night, her grandmother was rolling dough with tired hands and sharp eyes. "You're home late." Layla hesitated, then blurted, "I might have ruined a very expensive shirt and accidentally gotten hired by a billionaire." Her grandmother dropped the rolling pin. Literally. Layla laughed awkwardly. "I think I'm his new cook." The older woman stared at her, then asked just one question. "Do you trust him?" And that's when the laughter stopped. Because the truth was, no. She didn't trust him, but somehow she believed him. The next morning, she took the subway with trembling hands and a paper bag of yakisoba ingredients on her lap. Her apron still smelled like ginger and garlic. She walked into the Stone Enterprises building. Polished marble floors, glass walls, silent elevators. "I'm here for Richard Stone," she told the receptionist. The woman blinked twice, picked up the phone, and said, "Sir, your cook has arrived. Top floor, private kitchen." She expected coldness, a test, maybe even mockery. What she didn't expect was the quiet man leaning on the marble counter, arms crossed, watching her like he was trying to figure out what flavor she was. "Took you long enough," he said. "I got lost 3 times." He chuckled. "Good. Let's see if you're worth the trouble." And just like that, it began. Not with flirting, not with compliments, but with a quiet kind of tension. One that felt a lot like boiling water. Because even though she was the one with the apron, somehow it felt like he was the one getting cooked. And as she rolled up her sleeves, she couldn't help but wonder. What happens when the poorest girl in the room becomes the only one who ever told him no? Chapter 1. The sauce that changed everything. The kitchen was too clean. Layla stood just inside the doorway, her delivery shoes squeaking faintly on the polished tile. The countertops looked untouched, like no one had ever dared cook there. Everything gleamed. Glass jars lined up like soldiers, knives hung in perfect alignment, and a faint citrus scent floated through the air, probably from some expensive cleaning product she couldn't pronounce. And across the room, leaning casually against the marble island, was Richard Stone. Black shirt, sleeves rolled, watching her. "Don't be shy," he said. "The fire's not what you should be afraid of." She raised an eyebrow and stepped forward, her grip tightening on the brown paper bag she carried. Inside it were vegetables, a pack of homemade noodles, and her grandmother's sauce, a blend of ginger, soy, sesame, and something no one could ever guess. He gestured toward the stove. "Show me what made your yakisoba famous." Layla blinked. "Famous? You don't think I order from Meadow's Spoon 3 times a week because I like the app's interface, do you?" She snorted, despite herself. "You, eating from a hole in the wall in Queens?" He shrugged. "Even billionaires have cravings." She glanced around once more, suddenly nervous. This wasn't her stove. The knives were sharper, the heat stronger, the man beside her more intimidating than anyone she'd ever met. And yet, he wasn't yelling. He wasn't mocking her. He was waiting. So she moved. She unpacked her bag, washing the bok choy, chopping the scallions, boiling water for the noodles. Her hands remembered the rhythm, her body falling into the dance of cooking. Steam curled up from the pan like a whisper. Garlic hit the oil and sizzled with promise. Then, halfway through stirring the sauce, her hand slipped. Too much soy. The color deepened, too dark, too fast. She froze. No. Richard stepped closer. "What happened?" She tried to fix it, added vinegar, a splash of sugar, but the damage was done. The smell was unmistakable. Salt. Too much of it, like ocean water clinging to your throat. "I ruined it," she whispered. He picked up a clean pair of chopsticks, dipped them into the pan, and took a bite. Chewed. Swallowed. Paused. Layla held her breath. Then he asked, deadpan, "Have you ever been to the Atlantic?" She frowned. "What?" "Because this tastes like you cooked it in the Atlantic." Her face burned. "I can fix it." But then he laughed. A real laugh, the kind that cracked through his usual cool like a sunbeam in winter. "It's terrible," he said, "but it's your terrible. I respect that." She blinked. Was this some rich people way of mocking her? But no, he was still smiling. "Try again," he said, handing her another pan. This time she took it slower, measured every drop of soy, closed her eyes before adding the ginger, thought about her grandmother's voice. Cook with your hands, yes, but season with your memory. And when she served the second plate, Richard took a bite and actually closed his eyes. "This," he said, "tastes like a place I forgot." She didn't ask what place. She didn't want to break the moment. Later that afternoon, as she was cleaning the counter, a man in a charcoal suit walked in without knocking. Paul. Cold smile, crisp hair, slight frown, like he disapproved of her mere existence. "Mr. Stone," he said sharply, "we need to talk." Richard sighed. "Layla, finish up here. I'll be in my office." She nodded, but as they left, she caught Paul's voice echoing back down the hall. "You're wasting time on a street cook?" The door closed. Her chest tightened. She turned back to the counter, scrubbing harder than necessary. 30 minutes later, Richard returned. "Change of plans," he said. "You're cooking for my business dinner tomorrow night." She turned, stunned. "You're what?" He smirked. "You heard me. 6 investors, 1 night. Impress them." Her jaw dropped. "Why me?" He stepped closer, leaned just enough to make her heart race. "Because the best food doesn't come from chefs with stars on their sleeves." He paused. "It comes from girls who nearly drowned me in soy sauce, but still made me ask for more." That night, back home, her grandmother stirred noodles in the tiny pot that had fed 3 generations. He said, "What?" the old woman asked. "Mia wants me to cook for investors," Layla replied, still dazed. The elder smiled without looking up. "Don't burn the noodles, girl. You're not cooking for them. You're cooking for your future." Layla watched the steam rise from the pot and wondered, when was the last time she let herself imagine one? Have you ever ruined something and had someone stay anyway? Chapter 2. You Don't Belong Here. Layla had never walked into a room and felt smaller than when she arrived at Stone Enterprises the next morning. There was a radio system. Somewhere, Layla would have. She carried a woven basket full of fresh ingredients: shrimp, ginger, garlic. and wore the same apron she'd used for years. There were tiny oil stains on the hem, a rip near the waist that she had stitched herself. She had meant to replace it. Now she wished she had. As she stepped into the lobby, heels clicked around her like a metronome of power. Everything smelled like polished wood, citrus perfume, and control. Eyes followed her, not with curiosity, but with judgment. Is that her? The cook. She doesn't even have a badge. She kept her head down and her arms tight around the basket. They didn't have to say it. She didn't belong here. The private elevator took her straight to the top floor. When the doors opened, the kitchen looked the same, flawless, silent, waiting. But something had shifted. On the island counter were 3 stacked takeout boxes, delicate, white, and sealed with gold ribbon. Next to them sat Richard, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled again, picking through one of the dishes with a frown. She raised an eyebrow. "What's all this?" He barely looked up. "Paul insisted I try food from upscale chefs. LeBlanc, Fiore, some place that serves foam in a spoon and calls it dinner." Layla opened one container. Inside was a single scallop decorated with edible flowers and a whisper of sauce. "This looks like someone sneezed on a leaf." Richard snorted. "Try it." She did. Chewed. I swallowed. Then looked up, deadpan. "This tastes like regret and cardboard." For the first time that day, he laughed. A chef with opinions. Good. She unpacked her own ingredients and got to work. The sense of real food, oil, garlic, fresh shrimp, quickly took over the space. She could feel his eyes on her again. But this time, it wasn't critique. It was something quieter. Maybe admiration. Maybe caution. An hour later, as she was packing leftovers, the door opened again. Heels this time. Sharp. Expensive. Layla turned, and there she was. Tall, blonde, wrapped in a beige suit that probably cost more than Layla's entire kitchen. "Richard, darling," the woman cooed. He didn't smile. "Miranda." Layla froze. Miranda. The Miranda. The one whose perfume name-dropped itself in headlines. The ex. The one Paul mentioned in hushed tones. Miranda turned and gave Layla a once-over, like she was inspecting a smudge on a glass. "And who's this?" she asked. Richard spoke without hesitation. "My personal chef." Miranda's laugh was light and cruel. "A chef? In this building? Since when do you need one?" Layla held her tongue. Barely. But Miranda stepped closer, eyeing her apron, the steam behind her. "Well," she said, "I suppose even CEOs get lonely enough to hire entertainment." Layla's chest burned, her fists clenched. But Richard stepped forward before she could speak. "Enough," he said, quiet but firm. Miranda tilted her head. "Just making conversation." Richard looked her in the eye. "She's not your conversation." After Miranda left, heels echoing through the hallway like gunshots, Layla didn't say anything. She went back to the sink, rinsed a pot, scrubbed harder than she needed to. "You okay?" Richard asked. She didn't look up. "She's right, though," she muttered. "About what?" "I don't belong here." Silence. Then footsteps. Then his voice, close behind her, lower than before. "You don't belong here." He paused. "But neither do I." She turned. He wasn't smirking. He looked tired, almost hollow. "Those people," he said, "they know my net worth, my reputation. Not one of them knows how I take my coffee." She swallowed hard. "Maybe they're afraid to ask." He shrugged. "Maybe. But you didn't flinch when you told me I oversalted your grandmother's sauce." "Huh. That's worth something." She wanted to smile, but something inside her stayed guarded. He noticed. "Look," he said, softer now. "You're not here to impress them." "Then why am I here?" He paused, and answered honestly, "Because you make me forget how much I hate my own life." That night she went home and lay on her narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling. The smell of shrimp and ginger clung to her hair. Her grandmother peeked in. "You okay?" Layla nodded. Your eyes are puffy, the old woman said, sitting beside her. That means something and you got bruised today. Layla looked away. I don't belong in that world. Grandma chuckled. Sweetheart, no one belongs anywhere. You just choose the kitchen you want to fight in. When was the last time someone stood up for you, not because they had to, but because they chose to? Chapter 3. We'll build it together. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Not a dramatic day. No storms. No press. No arguments. Just a quiet morning in the private kitchen, sunlight warming the counters, and the sound of Richard's spoon clinking against a bowl. Layla was plating rice when he said it. Out of nowhere. Like he was asking her opinion on the weather. What if we opened a restaurant together? She froze, ladle in midair. What? He looked up, casual. You heard me. She blinked, then laughed like he'd just asked her to join a space mission. Richard, you barely survived a sandwich last week. True, he said, unfazed, but I survived it, with style. She stared at him. You're serious? He nodded. You're brilliant in a kitchen. I'm good with investments. That's a power combo. Layla shook her head. No. That's a disaster waiting to happen. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. The words followed her home, echoed in the walk-in fridge at Meadows Spoon, hummed in her ears as she wiped down tables. What if? She found herself sketching menu ideas on a napkin. Not because she believed it would happen, but because the thought of it made her heart ache, in a good way, the kind of ache that whispers, you've been surviving, but what if you started dreaming again? Later that week, as she was folding wonton wrappers beside her grandmother, she said it out loud. Is he still the present? Linda left me? Wants to... Yeah. Grandma Elsie didn't flinch. Just kept folding. Did them in? The billionaire? Layla nodded. The old woman said nothing for a long time. Does he make you feel small? Layla blinked. No, actually... The opposite. Another pause. Then Grandma smiled. Then maybe he's the first thing in your life that doesn't shrink you. Back at Stone Enterprises, Richard had already picked 3 potential locations. She gawked at the printed map spread across his conference table. You've been busy, she muttered. He shrugged. I don't move slowly. Life's too short to wait for perfect timing. She studied the options, downtown, Upper West, and... She froze. The village? He smiled. Your village, where your grandmother's place is. You want to open a restaurant there? Why not? She stared at him. No one opens anything near my village unless it's a pawn shop or a laundromat. Then let's change that. They debated everything. The name. The pricing. The color of the chairs. You can't charge $30 for soup, she snapped. He smirked. You underestimate the power of presentation. It's still soup. He leaned in, teasing. Gourmet broth? She threw a towel at his head. One evening, he caught her staring at the plans in silence. You're thinking of backing out. No. You're scared. Yeah. He waited. She bit her lip. I've never had something like this before, not even close. Richard leaned against the wall, folding his arms. Then let's make it yours, all the way. She looked up. What do you mean? I want it to feel like home. Your kind of home. With spice, with laughter, with affordable plates and food that heals. She blinked. No man had ever said that to her. No man had ever meant it. The next day, she walked back into the Meadow Spoon kitchen and told her grandmother, If I do this, will you come with me? The older woman put down the pan. You're not replacing me, are you? Layla smiled. You'll always be the chef. I'm just finally catching up. Her grandmother wiped her hands. Then let's show them what women like us can build. They picked the smallest of the 3 locations, a worn-down building with a crooked sign and vines crawling up one side. This, Paul groaned. This is where you're investing? Richard smiled. Exactly. Layla stood in the center of the dusty space, arms folded, heart racing. Feels right, she said softly. And that was enough. Outside, under the fading afternoon sun, Richard turned to her. You ready? Layla looked at the chipped doorway, the cracked windows, the rusted sinks, and then back at him. You know this could fall apart, right? He nodded. But what if it doesn't? And that's when she realized he wasn't offering her charity. He was offering her partnership. And maybe, just maybe, something more. What would you say yes to if you believed even for a moment that you were worthy of building something that lasts? Chapter 4, Miranda's Poison. The walls were up, the permits were signed, the floors still smelled like sawdust and lemon polish. And for the first time, Layla walked into the restaurant space not as a delivery girl, not as someone helping out, but as a co-owner. She dropped her bag on the prep table, looked around. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real. It had walls, invoices, blueprints, and stakes. But good things have a way of attracting storms. And this storm wore heels. Miranda showed up uninvited. Again, this time it was during a tasting session. Richard had just taken a bite of Leela's fried rice when the front door swung open with a confident clatter. "Darling," Miranda drawled, "you didn't return my call." Layla froze mid-sentence. Richard stayed seated. "I've been busy." "With what? Playing chef?" Her eyes flicked to Layla, then to the scattered recipe notes on the counter. "Oh," she smiled sweetly. "Still pretending she belongs here?" Layla swallowed hard but didn't move. Miranda sauntered inside, arms crossed. "You can't be serious, Richard. You've built an empire and now you're risking your name for what? Some girl with a walk?" He didn't flinch. "I'm not risking anything. I'm investing." "In her?" Miranda laughed. "She'll drown the second things get hard. People like her always do." Layla stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. "You talk a lot about people like me," she said, "but I've spent more nights covered in grease and flour than you've spent in real kitchens. I've held this dream longer than you've held a spoon." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so you speak now?" Layla's hands were trembling, but she didn't step back. "I cook with my hands. I pay bills with calluses. I didn't come from a place where dreams are gifts. I came from a place where we fight for them." Silence. Even Richard was still. Then Miranda smiled coldly. "How touching. Let's see how far those calluses get you when this restaurant crashes in the first month." She tossed a gold-foiled invitation on the table. "I'm throwing a charity dinner. All the city's biggest names will be there. You want to impress? Cater it." Layla stared at her. "Why?" "Because I want to give you a chance to prove me wrong." Her tone said otherwise. Miranda didn't want proof. She wanted public failure. Richard started to speak, but Layla beat him to it. "Fine," she said, staring Miranda down. "We'll cater it." After Miranda left, Richard turned to her. "You know she's setting you up, right?" Layla nodded. "But I'd rather go down swinging than hide from people like her." They worked for days, testing recipes, choosing ingredients, perfecting flavors. The night of the charity dinner, they arrived with trays of carefully plated dishes and nerves wired tight. Layla wore her cleanest apron and her fiercest expression. Guests mingled in gowns and tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Waiters passed through the crowd carrying trays of Layla's creations. Then, whispers. Something was wrong. Her waiter passed too quickly, tray wobbling. A man gagged into a napkin. Then someone shouted, "This food's gone bad." Layla's heart dropped. She ran to the kitchen. And there it was. A bottle she didn't recognize, open, tipped. One of the sauces had been tampered with. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Her mind reeled. She turned, and Richard was behind her. "She did it," she whispered. "She poisoned the sauce." His jaw clenched. Then came the click of a microphone. Miranda, standing at the front of the ballroom, smiled like a dagger. "I do apologize for the food tonight," she purred. "It seems some kitchens are better left closed." The crowd laughed. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Humiliation burned her skin. She wanted to run, disappear, cry, but Richard's hand found hers. "Go," he said. "Tell them the truth." She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't just feel small. She felt furious. She walked straight to the mic. The laughter faded. She grabbed it, heart pounding. "I know many of you don't know who I am," she began. "I'm Layla. I'm the chef behind the food you ate tonight. And I need to say this." She held up the bottle. "This was planted. Someone tampered with the food." Gasps. Miranda's face blanched. "But I won't be silent. I built my life with hands that never stopped working. And if you don't believe I belong here, taste my food. Taste my truth." She turned to the crowd. "If anyone still doubts me, come to my kitchen tomorrow. Watch me cook. I'll prove every lie wrong, with fire and flavor." Applause. At first, just one person. Then two. Then the room erupted. Miranda stormed out, her heels biting into the marble. And Richard stood there, watching Layla like he was seeing her for the first time. That night she stood outside, looking up at the sky. Richard came up beside her. "You didn't just survive tonight," he said quietly. "You owned it." She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think people like me ever really make it?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "Not often, but people like you, the kind who fight back with their heart, they don't just make it, they change things. When someone tried to break you, did you speak up or stay silent? And what would you say now if you finally had the mic?" Chapter 5. The night they got real. The restaurant lights were off. The prep was done. The team had gone home, and Layla stood alone at the back sink, hands in soapy water, scrubbing pans no one would ever see. She didn't hear him come in. Not until the familiar sound of his shoes stopped behind her. "I told them all to go home," she said softly. "You didn't have to stay." "I didn't," Richard replied. "I wanted to." She didn't turn around, just kept scrubbing. Her hands were shaking. The pressure of the week had caught up. The sabotage, the headlines, the weight of proving herself over and over again. And then, the whisper that had echoed all day. "They'll never belong here." Richard stepped closer. "Layla." She stopped scrubbing but didn't look at him. "You ever feel like, even when you win, people are still waiting for you to fail?" A beat of silence. Then he said, "Every day." She turned, surprised. He wasn't being flippant. He wasn't teasing. He looked tired. "I built a company," he said. "A brand, a reputation. And sometimes I think the only reason people shake my hand is because they're hoping I'll fall hard enough to make them feel better." She leaned back against the counter. "And you still show up." He shrugged. "So do you." They stood in silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint clink of pans settling. Outside, a siren faded into the night. "I never planned to do this," she admitted. "Open a restaurant? No care." She laughed quietly. "Not about any of this. I just wanted a paycheck and a quiet life." Richard walked to the table and sat down, hands steepled. "What changed?" "You kept showing up," she whispered. "Ah." He looked up, something unreadable in his eyes. "Layla." She joined him at the table, sitting across from him, still in her apron. "I'm not used to people staying," she said. "They either need something or they leave." He leaned in, voice low. "Then let me be the exception." That broke her. Not dramatically, not in tears, but in stillness. She looked at him, the billionaire CEO who should have been untouchable, and saw the same thing in his eyes that she felt in her chest. Loneliness. Not the kind that goes away in crowds. The kind that lingers even when you're applauded. He reached out slowly and brushed a bit of flour from her cheek. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then came the knock. Loud, sharp, urgent. Richard stood first, already tense. Leela followed him to the front door. A man in a dark coat stood outside, breath visible in the cool air. He handed Richard an envelope, nodded once, and disappeared down the street. Richard opened it. Inside was a photo of Layla in the kitchen, taken from a distance. No note, no sender. Just the image, a woman working, unaware someone was watching. Layla's blood turned to ice. "What is that?" "Surveillance," Richard said quietly. "Someone's following you." Her heart slammed in her chest. Miranda? Maybe. Or someone else who wants this place shut down. Layla turned away. She walked back inside, slowly, quietly, hands gripping the edge of the table. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, voice shaking. I just wanted to cook. Richard stepped behind her. You're not alone anymore. She blinked back tears, forced a breath. I don't want to be protected. You're not, he said. You're being backed. She turned, and in the dim kitchen light something shifted. They weren't co-owners. They weren't boss and employee. They were two bruised souls finding shelter in each other's stubbornness. He stepped closer, not touching, not pressuring, just there. And for the first time, she let him. She reached out, let her fingers brush his hand. No fireworks, no music. Just two people who'd finally stopped pretending. When was the last time you stopped being strong and let someone see the parts of you that were still afraid? Chapter 6. The headlines came for her name. The headline hit like a punch to the gut. It wasn't the first time Layla's name had been in the press, not by a long shot. But the words they used this time? The CEO's unlikely cook. Did she make her way up through passion or something else? She sat in the back office, staring at her phone screen, eyes burning from the onslaught of notifications. The messages flooded in, the calls, the texts, even a few emails labeled urgent and important. But the words blurred together. She couldn't focus. Her stomach churned, and all she could think about was the image. And standing in the kitchen, rolling dough, her face, bright with pride, plastered across every major news site. The truth about Layla Brooks and Richard Stone's partnership. What are they hiding? Layla wasn't just angry. She was hurt. Deep down, the betrayal was the sharpest sting. They'd taken something she worked for, something she'd earned with sweat and tears, and twisted it into something she couldn't control. They're trying to ruin us. Richard's voice had been tense when he saw the article. I'll handle it. But the truth hit harder than any strategy could fix. She grabbed her jacket, ignoring Richard's calls as she walked toward the door. Richard caught up to her in the hallway, his hand gripping her arm. Layla, don't. I have to go, she said, her voice trembling. I need to do something about this. You don't get it. This is all they'll see now. Just the girl who got lucky, the one who slept her way into the billionaire's world. Don't, he was whispering now. You know that's not true. She shook him off and stormed into the restaurant's kitchen, her hands shaking as she pulled the first knife she could find from the rack. I work for this, she muttered to herself, slamming the blade into the cutting board. I didn't cheat. I didn't trick anyone. I fought for this. It felt like the world was closing in on her. Like every voice was shouting at once, drowning her in the noise. You don't belong here. She's just his charity project. Street cook turned CEO's pet. The headlines had always been there, lurking in the background. The whispers, the looks. She had known this day was coming, the day they'd tear her down and reveal the truth they always believed was hidden. But then the door to the kitchen opened. Richard stood in the doorway, watching her with those familiar, serious eyes. He said nothing, just stepped inside, crossing the room toward her. Layla turned, eyes red, breath coming in sharp gasps. You can't fight this, she spat. They've already made up their minds about me. I know, he said quietly, but I'll fight it with you. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. The room was thick with silence until Richard stepped closer. This time he wasn't angry, he was calm, his voice steady and unwavering. Layla, they don't get to tell us who we are, and if they think they can tear us down, they're wrong. Her heart raced. I won't hide anymore, he said, and neither will you. That night, they worked late into the early hours. They went over every angle, every press release. They planned the next day's interviews, but more importantly, they didn't run. They stayed. And together, they built the response that would change everything. The following morning, Layla stood beside Richard in front of a podium at Stone Enterprises. The cameras flashed, the room was full of reporters. And she was ready. Good morning, Richard began, stepping to the microphone, his hand resting on Layla's shoulder. There's been a lot of talk lately, but let me make something clear. Layla Brooks is not just a cook. She's a partner, She's an equal, and she's earned every single ounce of respect she has. Layla squeezed her eyes shut for a second. He hadn't just defended her, he had lifted her, and that felt like a weight she hadn't known was on her chest, lifting off. Then he looked at her. His gaze held hers for a long moment, like they both knew what this was. A moment where everything could change. "I know some of you are here to question us," he continued, his voice still steady. "And that's fine, but let me tell you this. Our partnership isn't built on assumptions or privilege. It's built on hard work, dedication, and trust. So, if you want to ask us questions, ask us about our restaurant. Ask us about our vision. Ask us about the future we're building." Layla stepped forward, a little shaky at first, but stronger with every step. "Let me add something," she said, her voice raw but clear. "I never asked for any of this. I didn't come here for a handout or a quick ticket out of my life. I came because I earned my place here, and if you want to tear us apart, fine, but just know, I'm not going anywhere." The cameras went silent. The room was still. Then a reporter raised his hand. "Do you have anything to say to those who think this is a publicity stunt? That you're not really qualified?" Layla took a deep breath. "I'm qualified because I'm here, and I'll prove it." That night, as they walked out of the building, the weight of the day still heavy on her chest, Richard turned to her. "You did it." She smiled weakly, exhaustion still pulling at her bones. "We did it." He chuckled softly. "Now the world can see who you really are." Layla looked up at him, her heart a little lighter than before. "Let's build it," she said quietly. "Together." When you've been labeled, misunderstood, or underestimated, how do you take back control of your own story? Chapter 7. The Day She Stood Tall. It wasn't the first time the paparazzi were outside. But this time, Layla walked right past them, head held high, and didn't flinch when their cameras flashed. She'd been in the storm before. The rumors, the whispers, the questions about how she'd made it into Richard Stone's life. But this time, she was more than just an accessory. She wasn't just some poor girl he picked up out of sympathy. She wasn't a flavor of the week. She was herself. And that made all the difference. The restaurant was packed tonight. Layla moved through the kitchen like it was second nature. The team worked in rhythm. Knives clattering, pans sizzling, steam rising. Her hands were steady. Her mind, too. Richard was in the front, working the crowd of investors and high-end customers who still couldn't quite figure out how someone like her had become so indispensable. It had taken months. More failures than successes, more sleepless nights than she cared to admit. But now, as the customers dug into plates of her grandmother's yakisoba, with the delicate balance of flavors that she'd perfected over years, she felt it, the feeling of being seen. Not as Richard's cook, not as his charity project, but as someone who was building something from the ground up, brick by brick, ingredient by ingredient. Just after the dinner rush, when the last plates were cleared away and the staff started cleaning up, Richard walked into the kitchen, eyes gleaming with a look that only meant one thing. He was proud. "You know," he said, leaning against the counter, "I've never seen anyone handle a dining room like you do." Layla set down her knife and wiped her hands on her apron. "Maybe I've been here long enough to know how to survive the chaos," she smiled, a bit too tired to be coy. He stepped closer, something serious in his eyes. "You've handled more than chaos. You've made this yours." She paused. His words held weight, far more than just a compliment about the food. "Richard," she hesitated, wiping a smudge off the counter. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to be here." He smiled softly. "You didn't expect to be here, but you built it." It wasn't always easy, though. Layla had to fight for every ounce of trust. She'd never been handed anything on a silver platter, and she wasn't going to start now. Even though Richard had given her a chance, she still had to prove herself, not just to him, but to everyone who thought she didn't belong. And tonight, standing in the middle of the bustling restaurant, as the last customers filed out, she realized it wasn't just about the work. It was about the heart. Her vision, her strength. The next day, as the restaurant opened for lunch, Layla took a moment to step outside. The sun had just begun to climb high in the sky, casting a warm light across the city streets. There was something beautiful in the quiet that surrounded her. She remembered the first time she walked into this neighborhood, feeling like an outsider, carrying a basket full of hopes that didn't seem like they'd ever get a chance. But now she stood in the very same street, watching the cars go by, listening to the hum of the city as people passed. She wasn't afraid anymore. The people who tried to tear her down had failed. She had her own place here, not because Richard had given it to her, but because she had earned it. She turned back to the restaurant, pushing the door open, and walked inside. There was a quiet rhythm to everything now. The kitchen hummed, the staff moved fluidly, and the space itself felt alive, like it had finally settled into something real. When she walked back into the kitchen, Richard was waiting, leaning against the counter, a coffee cup in hand. Layla paused. He smiled. "I'm just watching you build it. Watching you take it all." She shrugged, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "Guess that's what happens when you finally stop pretending to be someone else." He set down the cup, stepping closer. "You're not pretending anymore, Layla. Not in here. Not out there." The restaurant had always been a dream, an impossible, fragile dream that had started with just the tiniest seed. But now, it was growing. It was alive. And it was hers. Not just the food, not just the reputation, the future. Layla glanced at the door, the people walking by, the city outside. And then, she turned to Richard, a quiet confidence filling her. "We're ready," she said. And just like that, she knew. Everything was different now. And it wasn't just the restaurant that had changed. It was her. What would you do if you stopped pretending and started building what you were always meant to create? Chapter 8. The Storm Breaks. It was a night that felt too heavy. Layla couldn't explain it, but something in the air had shifted. The restaurant, bustling and full of laughter as usual, suddenly seemed quieter. The kitchen was running smoothly. The staff was in rhythm. But Layla couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming. She'd seen it before, the way people acted when they sensed danger, even if they couldn't name it. It was in the air tonight. Richard was unusually tense, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes, his phone vibrating constantly on the counter beside him. He'd been distracted all day, not the usual calm, collected CEO she knew. Something was off. She watched him from the kitchen window, standing near the front, talking to Paul, his financial advisor. His hand ran through his hair in frustration as Paul said something Layla couldn't quite hear. "Everything okay?" Layla called out, walking into the front. Richard didn't meet her eyes right away. He cleared his throat, setting the phone down. "Yeah, everything's fine, just some business stuff. Nothing we can't handle." But Layla didn't miss the faint crease between his brows, the unease in his shoulders. "Richard," she started, moving closer. "What's going on?" He finally looked at her, his expression harder than usual, but something in his gaze softened. "We have a problem." It started with a call, then a message, then a meeting. Layla didn't understand it all at first. She just saw the frantic energy in Richard's eyes, the way he paced the office like a man with 1,000 thoughts racing through his head. Miranda had struck again. But this time, it wasn't just about slandering her or sabotaging the restaurant. It was deeper, more personal. A viral video had been released just hours ago. A grainy shot of Layla, caught off guard in a conversation with a former colleague who had a reputation for petty gossip. In the video, it looked like she was confessing to something. The words were muffled, but the message was clear. Layla had lied her way into the restaurant business. The social media storm that followed was unforgiving. Layla sat down in the office, trying to breathe, trying to calm the swirling chaos in her chest. But it felt like the walls were closing in. Her phone lit up with notifications. Scam, fraud, exposed. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged, but this time it felt different. The world was turning its back on her. The dream she'd fought for was slipping through her fingers like sand. Richard stood beside her, leaning against the desk, looking through the messages as they flooded in. "This is all bullshit," he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. "I know," she whispered. "But they're saying it's true. Everyone is saying it's true." "No," Richard snapped, slamming the phone down. "This is Miranda's doing. She's got something on the inside." That's when it hit Layla. The fear that had been building in her chest turned into something else. Rage. She wasn't going to let this happen. Not like this. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. Richard tried to stop her. "Layla, wait. This isn't how we handle it. We'll fix this through the press. We'll—" "No," she said, her voice colder than she felt. "I'm not letting her do this. Not again." She stormed out of the office, the front door slamming behind her. Richard followed, running after her through the restaurant, but by the time he reached the street, she was already halfway down the block, her face a mask of determination. Layla wasn't thinking clearly. All she could hear was the sound of those words echoing in her mind. "Fraud. Liar. You don't belong here." The paparazzi had gathered at the entrance, cameras flashing. She ignored them, her mind a whirlwind as she pushed through the crowd toward the one person she needed to see. She arrived at Miranda's office within the hour. Miranda's secretary let her in with a knowing look, one that said she knew exactly why Layla was here. Inside, Miranda was seated behind her glossy desk, a smug smile playing on her lips. The same smile Layla had seen 1,000 times, the one that was always followed by a knife in the back. "I see you're here for round 2, Miranda said coolly, her voice dripping with sweet malice. Layla stepped forward. "You think this is over? You think you can control my life with a video, with lies?" Miranda laughed. "I'm not controlling anything. You did this yourself. You let yourself be used by people who will never see you as anything but the help. And now the truth is out." Layla clenched her fists, fighting the tears that threatened to surface. "You're wrong," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "And I'm not running anymore. Not from you. Not from anyone." Richard walked in just as Layla's words hung in the air. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Miranda didn't even flinch. "Just cleaning up a mess," she said with a smirk. "Your chef seems to think she can fool everyone, but the truth always comes out, doesn't it?" Layla glanced at Richard, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everything they had built together. "This ends now," Layla said, turning back to Miranda, her voice strong. "You don't get to control my future anymore. I'm going to keep fighting for it. For this restaurant, for everything I've worked for. And for the first time in my life, I'm doing it for me." Richard stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll fight it together. All the way." Layla smiled through the storm. "Together. What would you do if you stopped running from the lies about you and started fighting for everything they never thought you deserved?" Chapter 9. The future we didn't plan for. The media storm had passed, but the aftermath still hung in the air like smoke. Layla sat in the back office, the steady rhythm of her breath a contrast to the chaos that had engulfed her life. The headlines were still there, but the noise was beginning to fade. It wasn't over, not yet. But it was the beginning of something different. She ran her fingers through her hair, her mind tired but sharp. There was a strange kind of peace in the stillness of the restaurant. The hum of the fridge, the soft chatter from the front as customers ate, the clink of dishes. They had weathered the storm, they had fought back. And yet, something in her chest told her that the hardest part was still ahead. Richard walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee, his face unreadable. He set one down on the table in front of her and sat opposite her, watching her as though he were waiting for her to say something. She didn't speak right away. After everything, after the press conference, after confronting Miranda, the reality was sinking in. She had everything she'd fought for, but what if that wasn't enough? "What now?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost among the soft clinking of glasses and chatter. Richard's gaze softened. "Now, we rebuild." She shook her head, looking at the coffee cup in her hands, her fingers wrapped around it for warmth. "Rebuilding sounds simple, but we both know it's not." He leaned forward, his voice steady. "No, it's not. But we're not doing this for anyone else. We're doing it for us. For this." Layla looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. They had come this far together, and maybe that was the point. She wasn't doing this alone anymore. Neither of them were. The next few days were a blur. Press interviews, client meetings, strategy sessions. It felt like everything was moving so fast, but Leila found herself holding on to the idea that somehow they could make this work. They would make it work. The restaurant was growing, slowly but surely, and so was the bond between them. But Leila couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still more to face. That night, after the dinner rush, Richard pulled her aside into the office, closing the door behind them. "Leila, we need to talk," he said, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it before. The weight of his words hit her instantly. She looked up from the desk, already sensing something important was coming. "About what?" Richard hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "About us?" Her heart skipped. "Richard, we've been through a lot," she started, but he cut her off gently. "I'm not talking about the restaurant. I'm talking about you and me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Leila's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected this. She had prepared herself for everything else, the media, the sabotage, the next wave of challenges, but this was different. "I think we built something here," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "But I'm not sure if we're building it for the right reasons." Leila stood up, her palms flat on the desk. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "Leila, I've been thinking. We've been running on adrenaline for so long, fighting everyone else, trying to prove them wrong. But I don't want us to keep going like this, just because we're proving a point." She swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. He reached out, touching her hand lightly. "I care about you. More than just the restaurant. More than just the business. I don't want to lose that." Leila stared at their hands for a long moment before she looked up into his eyes. "I didn't ask for this either. I didn't ask to need you, but I do." Richard let out a soft sigh, relief flooding his features. "Then maybe we should stop pretending we're in control of everything." Leila tilted her head, her emotions raw. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, let's not wait until everything is perfect. Let's take it one day at a time. Let's stop fighting so hard and start living." She stared at him, trying to make sense of everything. They had always been so focused on winning, proving the world wrong. But now, in the quiet, in the space between them, she realized that maybe winning wasn't the point anymore. Maybe it was about living in the mess, building together. No grand gestures, no corporate games, just the two of them. Her chest tightened with the weight of it. "And if we fail?" Richard smiled softly, taking her hand in his. "We fail together, but we don't quit." The next few weeks were about more than just rebuilding the business. They spent time together, real time, not between meetings or cooking shifts, but time that meant something. Conversations in the kitchen, cooking together, laughing, talking about the future without looking at it through a lens of pressure. They weren't just Richard and Leila anymore. They were partners, in every sense. By the time the grand opening of their second location arrived, they were ready. Not just for the customers, not just for the press. They were ready for each other. Leila stood outside, watching Richard handle the last-minute details with calm precision. The restaurant was buzzing inside, every table filled with hopeful, excited faces. She could hear the laughter, the chatter, the clink of wine glasses. She turned to Richard as he stepped beside her. "We're doing it," she said softly. He smiled, squeezing her hand. "We always were, but now, we're doing it right." Leila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. What happens when you stop running from the pressure and start living for the moment? Chapter 10. The moment we've been waiting for. The lights were dim, the night had settled over the city, but the energy in the restaurant was electric. There was an excitement in the air, but this time, it wasn't from the customers or the media. It was from the heart of the restaurant itself. The place where they had first fought for a future, where the dream had started with nothing but a vision and a determination that they would never quit. Tonight was different. Tonight it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about them. Leila walked into the kitchen, the the familiar scent of garlic and soy filling her senses. The kitchen was a symphony of noise, the chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of the pans, the hum of the oven. But all of that faded into the background as she saw Richard standing by the counter, his back turned to her. The same Richard who had given her a chance. The same Richard who had fought with her, for her, even when everything seemed impossible. The same Richard who was no longer just her boss, no longer just her partner in the restaurant, but something more. She walked up to him, her footsteps silent against the floor. He didn't turn around. "You know," he said, his voice low, "this has been a long time coming." Leila reached out, touching his shoulder gently. He spun around, startled by her presence, and then, when he saw the look in her eyes, his expression softened. They were standing on the edge. The opening of their second location had been a massive success. The press coverage had been glowing, the food had won rave reviews. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. This quiet moment in the kitchen, in the place where it all started. "Richard," Leila said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "do you ever wonder how we got here?" He smiled, his hand brushing hers. Every day. It wasn't just the restaurant that had transformed, it was them. The business was flourishing, yes, but more than that, their bond had grown into something unbreakable. They had built a life together. Not just a future with profit margins and quarterly reports, but a life full of respect, trust, and love. They'd fought battles together, they'd faced public scrutiny, they'd rebuilt what had been broken and created something entirely their own. But tonight, it was about more than their success. It was about the next step. About the future they had started to build side by side. The soft glow of the lights above them cast shadows in the kitchen, but all Leila could see was Richard, the man who had become everything to her. "You know," Richard said, his voice quieter now, "I think we've earned this moment." She nodded. "We have." The door swung open and Leila heard the voices of the staff coming in, followed by the guests settling in for their dinner. The buzz of the evening had already begun. The restaurant was alive with the hum of celebration, but for a brief moment she felt like it was just the two of them again, in their own little world. Richard turned to her, his gaze intense. He reached for her hand, pulling her closer, and without a word, he kissed her. A kiss that wasn't just about the passion they'd shared for months, but about the respect they had earned for each other. A kiss that spoke of everything they had been through. "Elena, you mind telling the truth?" The kitchen faded away, the crowd, the chaos, the noise of the world. It all disappeared in that moment. "I think it's time," Richard whispered, his lips still brushing hers. Leila nodded slowly, her heart pounding. The wedding wasn't what anyone had expected. There were no grand ballrooms, no lavish gowns. It was small, intimate. The ceremony took place at the community center, where they had first met. The same place where Leila had first dreamed of something bigger than herself. The same place where Richard had stood by her, choosing to fight beside her. Their vows were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had built. Richard took her hand in his and said softly, "You are the heart of everything I do. I promise to love you, protect you, and never let go." Leila looked at him, tears filling her eyes, and whispered, "I promise to never stop fighting for us, for our future. I choose you, always." The ceremony was quiet, full of joy and overflowing with love. Their guests, friends, family, staff who had become like family, watched as they exchanged rings. The restaurant wasn't just their business anymore. It was their home, their foundation. As the night wore on, the crowd slowly dispersed. Leila and Richard stood outside, the stars shining above them, the city lights twinkling in the distance. They didn't need words. They didn't need to say anything more. They had built this, together. And now, they had a future. Richard took her hand in his and smiled. "So, what's next?" he asked. Leila smiled back, her heart full of hope. "We keep building. When everything falls into place and the world feels right, what do you do next? Do you settle, or do you keep building the journey we took together?" The restaurant had been quiet for a while now. The last of the staff had left, and the street outside had calmed. The night had softened into a peaceful lull, with the soft glow of the city lights casting long shadows on the walls. Layla stood by the window, looking out at the skyline. It was a view she had seen countless times before, but tonight it was different. The weight of everything she had fought for was lifting, and for the first time in years, she could breathe. She turned when she felt his presence behind her. Richard. He stood at the doorway, watching her with a softness in his eyes that she had never seen before. There was no tension in the air anymore, no doubt. Only quiet peace. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Layla asked, her voice soft, almost like a memory of its own. Richard smiled, stepping closer. "You mean the time you spilled juice all over that banker's shirt and I decided to hire you?" She laughed softly. "Yeah, that time." His smile deepened. "I don't think I've ever been more surprised in my life." She nodded, a wistful look in her eyes. "I never imagined I'd be here. I never imagined this would be my life." They had come a long way. From that first chaotic encounter, from the restaurant's humble beginnings, to the battles they'd fought together, to the love they had slowly built, brick by brick, meal by meal. Through the media storms, the betrayals, the doubts, they had stood by each other. And now, they stood in the quiet that followed it all, stronger and more sure than ever before. It wasn't just the restaurant that had grown, it was them. "I used to think I had everything figured out," Richard said, his voice quiet. "That success meant a title, a big office, a fortune. But now—" Layla turned to face him, her heart full. "Now you know it's not about titles, it's about people. The ones you choose to be with, the ones who fight with you." He nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "I couldn't have built this without you, without us." She squeezed his hand, her heart lighter than it had ever been. The weight of the world no longer seemed so heavy. It wasn't just the money, the fame, or the accolades that mattered anymore. It was the people, the love, the home they had built together. "We've come so far," Layla whispered, "and it's only just the beginning." Richard smiled, his gaze soft but certain. "We've built something no one can take from us, something real." They stood there for a moment, their hands intertwined, watching the city stretch out before them. The future, once so uncertain, now felt clear. It was a future built on trust, love, and the quiet certainty that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, but they were no longer afraid. They had built this together. And for the first time in a long time, Layla knew that the world didn't get to define her anymore. She defined herself. She defined them. Richard's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "Do you think we've earned it?" Layla smiled, looking up at him, her heart full. "I think we've earned everything." He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers in a quiet kiss. And in that moment, as the world outside continued to move, they both knew. They had already won. If this story touched you, remember, the journey we take isn't about the destination. It's about the love we choose, the battles we fight, and the life we build together. Don't stop building your story. What does it take to truly earn the life you want? Is it the success you achieve or the love you build along the way?